Hello, guys. Welcome to another episode of the Commerce Lab by Ecomcy, the pleasure is related to Amazon FBA Parallel and e-commerce. My name is Vincenzo Toscano, founder and CEO of Ecomcy, and today we bring another special guest. His name is Shinjin, and he's the Director of Global Selling and Partnership at Picaro, which is one of the top agencies when it comes to scaling brands in Amazon Japan. Amazon Japan has been one of those things that has been a hot topic lately because the growth of this market has been very fast, very significant, and there's a huge amount of opportunities in there. And that's why I wanted to bring Shinjin today to talk about all the strategies, what is happening, things that you have to consider. Is actually Japan the right market for you, and so much more. So Shinjin, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. How you doing, my friend?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, Vincenzo. Looking forward to it.
Thank you for being here. I'm super excited for today's episode. Japan is definitely, one of those regions that is been having such a rapid growth. I was actually very close. I was in Asia. I was in Thailand, Vietnam, and Singapore. I was very close to go to Japan. I couldn't make it, but hopefully next year.
Good. You should.
Uh,
It's
I need to. I need to. Everybody tells me that Japan is a dream. It's like you go inside a video game.
hmm
So I really want to go. But everybody that been in Japan, when I spoke to them in Asia, they told me the amazing opportunities they're seeing with Amazon Japan. And that's what I want to highlight today with you and what you guys do at Picaro. I guess before we dive into that, tell us a little bit about you, the
Yeah,
agency
for
aspect
sure.
for those who might not know you, and we go
Yeah, for
forward.
sure.
Yeah.
No, thank you. So my name is Shinjin. I've been in the Amazon advertising space for about 8 years now. I'm just jumping into my eighth year. So I've been using Amazon ads, running ads for our brands clients for quite a while now,
Yeah.
and the space has very much changed. And originally, I
Yes.
was working at a company called Channel Bakers in the U.S. I was there for 7 years, and I joined Picaro, the company that I currently represent, 3 months ago. So I lived in Japan until I was 18, and then I moved
Mm,
to Anaheim, California, and I lived there for several years. And then I moved back to Japan about 2 years ago. And so,
nice.
being local definitely helps in understanding, what the Amazon space is like in Japan. At Channel Bakers, I was initially hired to run campaigns in Japan. So I've
Okay.
been managing both US, European, Japanese clients, and so it's really interesting to see the differences and the very different nuances of each region on Amazon.
That's good. That's good. Actually, I always say like the best way to really sometimes master a market is you have to be in it, not only from the perspective of the language, but it's also the fact that I'm sure you're gonna have some insights that nobody else is gonna have from the perspective of the culture, how you interact with people, um, things that happen on a daily basis that it go beyond data. And I think I'm sure that adds a ton of value to your customers. Now, I'm sure for a fact, pick out your specialties that like helping brands scale on Amazon Japan. And I get a lot of questions, which I'm sure resemble with the ones that you get at Picaro, which is, what are some of the things you have to consider when it comes to expanding to Amazon Japan? Because it's a new country altogether, the language is completely different. So people get very nervous about, some of the things that they have to have in hand to get ready. So I guess I just want to touch some of them high level, not go too much into detail. But
Sure.
some of the first questions I get is like, do I need a company in Japan to sell in Amazon Japan, or can I use my US entity, for example? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a little complicated, right? So in order to sell products in Japan, you either need to have your own entity
Okay.
or you need to go through an importer of record. And so Picaro, we don't offer services like that, but we do have partners that will take
Good.
care of everything like that. So I'd say that importing products into Japan is a pretty strenuous process.
Mm,
There's a lot of processes for approval that you need to go through, legal counsel that you probably have to go through until you can actually get your product into the country. And once you
okay.
do, then you have to deal with the logistics, if you're going to go FDA or if you're not. What a
Yeah.
lot of people do is that they work with distributors.
Okay.
So they would rely on them to upload their listings onto Amazon or to Rakuten because that's a pretty
Okay.
big marketplace as well in Japan. Yahoo Shopping, believe it or not, I don't know when the last time you heard of Yahoo was, but
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
a big marketplace in Japan. But then they would rely on those distributors to manage their account, campaigns, and my honest opinion is that these distributors they don't have that much knowledge when it comes to selling on Amazon. It's just kind
Okay.
of They upload their listing, just throw in a couple images in there, and then it's just leave it up to the algorithm, which tends to be quite a difficult process.
Yes, I think at the same time, I'm sure when people hear all this might get afraid, but this is also an opportunity because the fact that it's not that easy to get into Japan, that means if you put the homework and you put the time to really figure that out, that's where you could fall into what I have seen with some customers like blue oceans because there's not as much competition in these categories because not many people is actually selling into those because they haven't gone through all these obstacles. Now, when it comes to that categories, that's another question I get a lot. Is like I'm sure in Japan, given that the culture sometimes so different compared to the West, there are certain things that are gonna work compared to others. And my question to you is like, do you see certain trends in certain categories that they're moving faster than others? Like, do you what are some of those? Like, is it sports? Is it the kitchen? Is it toys? What are some of those categories that are becoming very trendy when it comes to shopping on Amazon Japan?
Yeah, I say, this is, I don't have specific data to prove
Yeah,
this. This is just my own anecdote.
yeah, of
But
course. Yeah.
I would say that a lot of like household home goods is a
Okay.
category that's expanding. That's just generally because a lot of people use Amazon as a means of not having to carry home their
Mm,
day-to-day goods because they have
interesting.
buying toilet paper, they have to hold it.
Mm,
Not many people will be holding it on the train, but they'd
yeah.
have to walk home with it. Instead of carrying two shopping bags, they'd rather carry
Mm,
one, so they would buy in bulk on Amazon.
mm,
So
mm.
that's definitely a category that's growing. House goods. I'd say beauty products are also a big
Yeah,
area that's starting to expand, especially with Korean beauty products becoming very popular.
exactly. Yeah.
They look towards imported products so that then they
Hmm.
can. But those are the products that are actually hard to get into Japan, right?
Oh,
Because of
really?
strenuous processes that you have to go through to get the product approved in order to sell in Japan.
Okay.
Um, yeah,
Cool, cool. Yeah, I think I was talking with a friend as well that in Japan, especially for women, beauty is such a big thing, like makeup, creams, and all of that.
yeah.
So I was actually in South Korea, and I met a manufacturer that he was very big, and one of his biggest markets was Japan. He was saying that how Japan loves. Things are made in South Korea. So yeah, maybe for those listening and watching, if you're willing to go through to the obstacles of getting your products approved, that could be a very good category for you. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Uh,
there's a lot of like those categories are important to consider as well. But
mm,
the real main thing that needs to be considered is making sure that your product is suited for
yeah.
Japanese customers, right? And people don't really think about this, but one major point of consideration when it comes to a shopper purchasing a product is definitely considering how big the product is. That tends to be a issue. Like Japanese houses are quite small, so you got to make sure that your products, if they're being sold in the US, maybe a chair, it's okay to be bigger, but in Japan
Hmm.
there's not that much space to be rolling around a big chair, so that has to be smaller, a for housing or like the household, but also people are just smaller in general too in Japan.
That's actually such a good insight. It's true. Like everything in Japan is very small. So yeah, if you bring an oversized item, you might struggle there.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, when it comes to the whole strategy, because of course there's the obstacles of the company, the importing, the paperwork, and all of that. But beyond that, there's also the complexity of the language, right? Like the fact that everything is in Japanese. So how what are some of the main, I guess, difference compared to doing Amazon in Japan compared to OS? Like what are some of, for example, the tools that you use? Because I know not all the tools works in Amazon Japan. What are some of the differences in terms of how you deal with dialects when it comes to copying in Japan? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. Let me start off with localization, right, for your
Yeah.
content. I've done some presentations regarding this and did a little bit of research myself, but Japanese content, like if you hop onto Amazon Japan, and even if you look at some of Amazon's listings, like for example, Alexa products or like Ring cameras, you can very much tell that the content is very different compared to what you see on Amazon.com. A lot of the content that you see in the US, it's very much lifestyle oriented, lifestyle
Mhm.
image just being used. They want to show the product actually being used by people within their content and maybe highlight some key points of the product. But in Japan, I would say there's less uses of lifestyle images, and it is full of text. Content, image gallery images, A plus content is just full of text, and Japanese, that shows the Japanese society's tendency to want to get as much information as possible from the things that they're seeing. Um, what's interesting is that this is like every day you get pieces of paper thrown into your mailbox, and we call them chirashi,
Mm.
and that's essentially a piece of paper for whether it be a brand or business that just showcases everything that they do into a one pager. And that's just a lot of information to dissect and break down, but people still manage to break it
It's
down
like
without
an anime style. It's like anime. You have all
yes,
the user.
everything bunched into together. So I think that being a culture over here really allows people to dissect information even though it's just a jumble. And so might as well use the space as much as you can. And so when people look at image galleries that tend to lack information, that
Mhm.
also impacts the trustworthiness of your product.
Interesting. Interesting. And talking about trust, like, what is there anything in Japan that people look for when shopping beyond reviews? Because, for example, to give an example I see in Germany,
Mhm.
uh, there's big things to do with, for example, badges of awards. Like there's this big thing in Germany that if pros have certain quality in terms of the test that was done by a lab, or the awards that they have, or the recognition they have a specific fair, people really look forward for that in Germany, as an example. In Japan, is the same. Like people really look forward to reviews and awards and certificates and things like that, or they go more with the, if the product looks good, if the infographics really respond my answer, I go and give it a try. Like how emotional are there when it comes to that?
100%. I think, listing the awards that your products have won, or even just your business. Like, for example, a lot of crowdfunding is a very big thing in Japan, especially when launching
Mm,
a new product. And so, a lot of companies would list things such as, we hit our 5 million yen goal, raising 5
mm,
million yen goal in just 1 week,
I
right?
see.
That's a flex to show that
Yeah.
a lot of people actually were interested in our product in order to invest in it so that we can get things launched.
Yeah.
I see a lot of things like that. Many images would showcase badges that may show things like, hey, we were the top seller in our category for 3 years in a row. We've had some reviews from people that showcase very high indication of the product being good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. And now when it comes to the optimization of the branding in Japan, does it mean usually most brands, on your experience and what you guys are doing Picaro, you to some extent have to do a little bit of rebranding? Because if you don't have all these kind of infographics and way of communicating your message and everything, like it seems like you really need to spend a lot of time in advance to reverse engineer how Japanese will perceive your product. And maybe you even need to change the packaging, which is something we haven't touched on. Like, is packaging also a little bit different the way people perceive packaging in Japan compared to the West? Like, what is also your experience with that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's not the end of the world if your
Mm,
packaging is still in English and stuff like
okay.
that. But definitely, again, kind of going back into the imports side,
Yeah.
things like beauty products or food,
Yeah.
those categories, you need to actually list everything. So yeah, the
Exactly.
packaging has to change, and then you
Mm,
could use that as an opportunity to potentially rebrand or localize.
mm-hmm.
But I don't think it's exactly a necessity, right?
Okay.
Maybe you're gonna want to change the sizes of your text. Maybe in the
Mm-hmm.
US you have your brand name just huge, slap it on the
Yeah.
your box. But maybe in
Yeah.
Japan you might want to make that smaller. That's up to the consumer to actually see what uh, works the best or what gets their attention. But see, that's why there are tools available, right? Like one thing that we do that we're really going to start to use is we met them a couple months ago is PickFu, right? PickFu is a
Mm,
great tool in order to use in order to get information from the actual consumer on what types of packaging they would prefer, what types of call to actions they would prefer within ads, what types of image gallery would actually get more engagement. So, testing and learning is definitely something that's very important here as well. Like there's no correct answer for
I
things
feel you.
revolving around branding and uh, content.
It's trial and error at the end of the
Yeah,
day.
exactly. And that's probably the same for every marketplace, right?
Yes. Now, PPC, because this is a big thing as well. A lot of times when people look into new markets, because the PPC, for example, in markets such as the US, is just so expensive, it's difficult to keep scaling brands and launching products. So people look to markets where the cost per click is much lower, the competition is lower. So tell me, what is the panorama looking like in Japan? Do you feel it's still early stages when it comes to PPC, or people's getting very savvy already? What do you think?
I'd say maybe like early to mid.
Okay,
Uh, what I like to say is that PPC, selling on Amazon, just the general knowledge around selling online typically is like 5 years behind what is currently being spoken about in
exactly.
the US, right?
Yeah,
Because the US is obviously front lines,
yeah.
but Japan is very slow at implementing new
Okay.
things. It just kind of it's cultural. Like people are less, people are more conservative.
I was gonna
They
ask you that. Like, I feel the perception they give me is that they don't try new things very fast and they're not very risky when it
Yeah,
comes to them.
they're very risk averse, very conservative. It takes a whole bunch of time to even at companies to try to implement new processes.
Mm,
They aren't that nimble. So as an agency, it's kind of tough to pitch to new
mm,
clients in Japan because like they have a 5 year relationship with their existing uh,
mm,
agency, and they're like, why do we have to switch? Like you guys can use
no,
AMC, but like nah, we like our current salesman, so
yeah,
whatever,
yeah,
right? But in that sense, it's about 5, 6 years behind. So PPC advertising it's not in its infancy, right? Like, but there are a lot of companies, brands leveraging sponsored ads without a certain strategy in mind. And I would say that a lot of the campaigns are still very much audience and auto targeted.
yeah, yeah.
So that means that it depends on a category, don't get me wrong, but CPCs are relatively lower compared to, what you see in the
Mm,
US at the moment. So
yes.
combine that with the fact that, okay, let's talk about that again, risk averse people, that means that they don't use tech. I think I was speaking with Amazon the other day and they were saying that Japan is like behind compared to every single region that Amazon is in. Don't quote me on that, every single, but in
Mm,
like a lot of the first world
yeah,
regions that Amazon has, um, the tech adoption is the lowest. So guys like
yeah. I
Helium
guess in
10,
terms of APIs, softwares, and all of that. Yeah.
yeah, so like PacView, Helium 10, they do have a presence here, Perpetua, but they're not as big, and people aren't as engaged with using tech as they are in other regions. So
Mm,
like the fact that that's the case gives you an opportunity. If you're being savvy and using tech, then you're using AI to optimize campaigns, you're using AMC reporting to actually create
mhm.
strategies that are very intentional, then you're on a track towards success. You're reaching the right people at a low CPC, bam, grow your sales.
Yeah. Wow, that's actually such interesting insight. I would actually expect the opposite, like that Japanese would be very into tech and innovation, but I guess it has to do with more with the fact that it's something new. It takes time for them to trust it, and really dive into that. Which now I'm assuming if that's the case, it could mean that also in Amazon Japan there isn't a lot of black hat, because if you're saying that they're not very risk friendly and all of that, like it's not like in the US that everybody's it has the stomach to do giveaways, to do things in the back end, to attack the competition, and then it seems like Japan is a more chill market. Could you say yes, or you still or you already see also black hat and dodgy things in Japan as well?
For sure. But like
Yeah,
not everybody, but yeah, I see
yeah,
that all the time, right?
okay,
And like I don't know if rules have changed, but back a couple of years ago, you weren't really able to use emojis in your
so
retail page. I see that all the time, right?
yeah,
And it doesn't seem like Amazon is very, if they're enforcing that over here in this region. I do see a lot of hero images being
mm,
edited so that it's not following guidelines,
yeah,
but that seems to have kind of become
the
like they've
norm.
kind of eased up on that in the US as well. I see a lot of PDPs that don't follow the hero
They
image
gave
guide,
up, it seems. Amazon gave up. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It seems like it. And so like
Mm,
as an agency, I kind of struggle, right? Like the competition is doing it, but I can't recommend that to my client and then have the listing taken down. And then like, guess what? Black Friday, your
no.
listing is not up. That's the last thing that we want. So
Yeah.
on your own risk, I would say, do that in Japan as well. It seems like they're not as strict in enforcing that. But I definitely do see a lot of brands still putting in pieces of paper. I think I just bought something for Black Friday, and
Mm.
then they said if you leave us a review, we'll give you a discount on our. Oh no, we'll give a free warranty. That's
Wow.
what.
Okay.
Leave a review, take a screenshot of it, send it to their QR code, and then they'll give you a free warranty. So
Yeah, which
those are
is
things that,
against terms and condition, but
yeah, like definitely a lot of gray hat, black hat tactics.
cool. Now, when it comes to conclude on the PPC side of things and listing creation, which tools do you recommend for keyword research in Japan that are working very well?
Keyword research. I mean, Helium 10
Mm-hmm.
works just like in any other region. Um, Internally at Picaro, we use Data Dive,
Mm-hmm.
made by Brandon Young.
Yeah.
That seems to be, a lot of insight that you could get in order to make a difference in the region. It's a lot of data that people aren't tracking over here. So that can put you ahead pretty far. When we optimize campaigns, personally, I'm a huge fan of XMars. So we've struck up a deal with them to start using them from this year. Um, so a lot of all the tech works in Japan. It's just, I would say, a matter of what you're used to using, and make sure that there's a support team in Japan that can actually help you out.
Awesome. Cool. Now, let me also bring to the conversation secondary markets, because as any markets, this Amazon is the leader, for example, but then you have secondary like it in Walmart, TikTok Shop in the US. Tell me a little bit, what is the panorama looking like in Japan? Like beyond Amazon, you have Rakuten, but how is the dynamic of Rakuten? Like, it's also very strong in Japan. Do you have any third marketplaces? Tell me a little bit about how people shop beyond Amazon in Japan.
For sure. Yeah, I'd say a lot of it is still, e-commerce penetration has definitely increased, but people definitely like to shop in person still in Japan.
Okay.
I think they really value going into a store.
The human interaction, yeah.
Yeah, actually touching the product, holding it, so that then they get an idea of, okay, like how sturdy is it? I think Temu is a great example, right? Like
Mm.
you see a PDP on Temu, and then you're like, oh, this looks awesome, but then the product is like $15, and
Yeah,
then
yeah.
you get it, and then it's like a toy, right? Like very very weak hinges that you feel like you could break it really easily, but that's something that people value. So it's definitely, you could get over that with your content, and I think Amazon does a very good job of it. But
Mm.
then behind that is Rakuten. um, when I first started working in Japan, I was still somewhat complicated around the differences between Rakuten and Amazon. But
Mm.
as I got to know the two different platforms, they're actually very different. They're not just e-commerce platforms, kind of like you would imagine, maybe like Walmart and Amazon, right? They're not stores that exist online. Um, Rakuten is kind of like, if I were to compare it to actual brick and mortar stores, um, Rakuten is like you're shopping in a mall. You're walking in a building, and then there's a lot of different storefronts that are actually there, and you can explore between them. But Amazon is like a catalog, right? It's like you're ordering from a magazine. It's, just pages of a lot of products, right? And then you have your
Mm.
brand store, which then creates that experience of, being in a mall. But Rakuten is a little different in that sense.
Okay.
Um, Companies
Cool.
would have their own storefront. It's actually hard to start selling on Rakuten.
Mm.
The background that you have to provide to them is much more rigorous than Amazon. You just
Mm.
can't create an account and start
Big
uploading your
time.
listings. Mhm.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
the distribution is not as robust as
Do they also offer something like FBA Rakuten? Like, can you send inventory to them and they deal with everything, or how
I
does it
believe
work
you
there?
have to. I believe you have to be like a very big client
Oh, okay.
to be able to
Okay.
do that. But like majority is like
They ship
FBA.
themselves. Yeah. Okay. So I would say the Amazon, Rakuten. So beyond those two, there isn't really a third player that is big enough to look at, right?
Third is Yahoo Shopping.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
I've
Interesting.
never shopped on Yahoo before. I don't even know if I ever will. Maybe I
Is there
should.
any eBay in there or no? Is that there's no eBay in Japan? Or there is?
They used to, but they don't have a presence here that big
Mm,
anymore. Yeah,
cool,
but
cool.
like a lot of e-commerce retailers are popping up based on categories,
I
right? Like
see.
for example, there might be e-commerce websites just for clothing. There might be
Exactly.
e-commerce sites just for sporting goods. Like
Mm,
imagine a Best Buy, right? Best Buy is pretty much electronics.
Mm.
Those are starting to pop up.
Okay, okay. Yeah, it makes sense. I think that also explains now, and I start to understand why Amazon is doing so well, because they brought something that it didn't exist, like next day delivery, the easy of shopping online and everything. So they definitely are disrupting the market compared to what the competition was already doing. Awesome. So now to conclude the episode, is there any other insights or tips you wanna provide to people when it comes to expanding to Amazon Japan? What else you think is important to know?
Yeah, I definitely say, it's a market that's hard to expand into just from, a legal perspective for distribution. Um, Definitely the language barrier is huge. So do not underestimate that, right? If your content is not localized and you just list your product on Amazon, even advertising it is not going to get you the conversions that you need. So don't underestimate the language barrier. If you're actually serious, hire an agency that's localized in Japan that is bilingual. I kind of want to raise my hand to say that that's who we are.
Go for
Um,
it.
but also, yeah, like, or actually hire someone internally that speaks Japanese and is somewhat local, or like has lived in Japan in the past, understands the culture, because it's not an easy marketplace to be successful in. However, if you can be successful, there's a very high chance, because like I believe Japan is one of those regions where our GDP is third. It used to be third, now it's fourth
Mm,
behind Germany. But then the number of sellers that are actually on Amazon is very, very low relative to the
yeah,
US
exactly.
or Germany, the UK. So there's a lot of opportunity. So as long as you get those pieces right, I think there's a lot of area for success.
Love it. So for those that might want to reach out to you, Shinji, and work with you and Picaro, tell us a little bit about where they can find you and how does it work.
Yeah, for sure. Or, I think the best way to get to reach us is to look me up on LinkedIn, and then add me there. I pretty much add anybody that gives me a request. So that would probably be the best. Vincenzo, I'll hook you up with my work email so people
Sure.
can,
I'll
reach
put
out
it
to me.
down in the description. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
perfect.
Cool. So other than that, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for teaching us a little bit about Amazon Japan. I think it's such an interesting market that if you have the time and you have the resources, you definitely should give it a try. I have seen so much success with some for brands as well. So I'm sure it can be something very meaningful for your business moving forward in 2025. So Shinjin, pleasure to have you in the show. Thank you so much.
Thanks
Hope
for
to see you
having me,
soon.
Vincenzo, and thank you everybody for listening.
Thank you. Bye bye.
All right, take it easy. Do I hop off?